What would you do if you overheard a secret that could destroy a good man's life? For Amelia Rousseau, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and family medical bills, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was the whispered conversation she caught between a millionaire she admired and his deceptively charming best friend. A secret so toxic it threatened to unravel a billion-dollar empire. She had a choice: stay silent and keep the job she desperately needed, or speak up and risk everything. Her decision would lead not to a simple thank you, but to a silent, imposing luxury car arriving at her door the very next day, ready to change her life forever or end it. The Gramercy Pearl wasn't the kind of diner where you'd find cracked vinyl booths and watery coffee. It was a New York institution, a carefully preserved time capsule of 1950s elegance, serving $30 club sandwiches to people who didn't look at the prices. For Amelia Mia Rousseau, it was both a stage and a prison. By day she glided between tables with a practiced smile, balancing trays laden with artisan burgers and truffle fries. By night she returned to a cramped Queen's apartment that smelled of turpentine and her mother's lavender-scented laundry detergent. The turpentine was from her own corner of the living room, a space crammed with canvases, brushes, and textbooks on Renaissance art restoration. That was the real Mia, the one who dreamt of Florence, of tracing the brushstrokes of masters of bringing faded beauty back to life. But her mother Isabella had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of multiple sclerosis 2 years ago, and the dream of Florence had faded into the harsh reality of co-pays, prescription costs, and the ever-present fear of the next medical emergency. The Gramercy Pearl, with its generous tips from oblivious hedge fund managers, was the only thing keeping them afloat. Most of the clientele were a blur of expensive suits and dismissive glances. But Mr. Julian Croft was different. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always at 2 p.m. after the lunch rush had subsided. He was probably in his early 30s with a kindness in his eyes that seemed out of place amongst the city's elite. He wasn't old money. The tech blog said he'd built his software empire Innovate Dynamics from his college dorm room. He never demanded, he always requested. He learned Mia's name on his second visit, and always asked about her day, listening to her answer, as if it genuinely mattered. He tipped 50% on his black coffee and grilled chicken salad every single time. To Mia, he wasn't just a customer. He was a 15-minute sliver of decency in a 10-hour shift of transactional servitude. That Tuesday began like any other. The lunchtime chaos ebbed, and Mia was wiping down a marble countertop when the familiar chime of the door announced Julian's arrival. But he wasn't alone. With him was a man who seemed to have been sculpted from polished ambition. He was taller than Julian, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Moore's entire student loan debt. His name was Marcus Thorne. Mia knew him from the society pages. His family was old-world banking royalty. He was Julian's best friend, his business partner in several philanthropic ventures, and according to the articles, the sophisticated yin to Croft's innovative yang. Marcus exuded a charm that felt like a weapon. He smiled at Mia, but his eyes swept over her with an unnerving coolness, cataloguing her cheap uniform and worn-out sneakers in a fraction of a second. "Mia, always a pleasure," Julian said with his usual warmth. "This is my friend Marcus Thorne. We'll take our usual booth." "Of course, Mr. Croft," Mia replied, forcing a smile for Marcus that didn't quite reach her eyes. She led them to the secluded corner booth, brought their usual orders without asking, and then retreated, busying herself with polishing silverware at a nearby station. The booth was designed for privacy, with high tufted leather backs, but the diner was quiet, and sound travelled. Mia wasn't trying to eavesdrop, not at first. She was just folding napkins, her mind, on a pigment mixing technique she'd read about, when Marcus's voice, a low and urgent murmur, cut through the quiet hum of the restaurant. "You're being sentimental, Julian. The Helios project is a cash bleed. The board is getting nervous. We need to liquidate those assets and to channel the capital into the Singapore acquisition." "It's a sure thing." Julian's voice was troubled. Liquidate Marcus Helios is a clean energy initiative. It's not just about profit. It's what we promised we'd do when we made our first billion. We promised we'd build something that lasts, something that helps. A soft, condescending chuckle from Marcus. "And we will, by being smarter. Look, I've already spoken to the acquisition team at Sterling Global. They're prepared to make a very generous offer for the Helios patents. It's clean, it's fast, and it plugs a hole in our quarterly projections." "Sterling Global?" Julian sounded surprised. "They're our biggest competitor in the Asian market. Why would they help us?" "They aren't helping us," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a conspiratorial whisper. "They're helping me secure our position. I've laid the groundwork. They see the value. All I need is your signature on the preliminary transfer agreement. I have it right here." Mia froze, a linen napkin clutched in her hand. Something about Marcus's tone was slick, practiced, like a well-rehearsed lie. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Marcus had a sleek leather portfolio on the table. Julian was shaking his head, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Marcus. This feels rushed. Selling our most promising green tech to a fossil fuel subsidiary like Sterling Global. It goes against everything we stand for. It stands for survival. Julian." Marcus's voice was a sharp hiss now. "Don't let your idealism bankrupt us. I've handled the delicate negotiations. Trust me. When have I ever steered you wrong?" The silence that followed was heavy. Mia could almost feel Julian's internal conflict from across the room. He revered Marcus. The media always portrayed their friendship as legendary, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of high-stakes business. Then Marcus delivered the line that made the blood in Mia's veins turn to ice. "I'll handle the board. They listen to me. And I've already set up the offshore holding account for the transfer. It's more tax-efficient that way. Cleaner. Offshore holding account. Tax-efficient." The words were corporate jargon, but the intent behind them felt sinister. It sounded less like a business deal and more like a heist. Why would a legitimate transfer need a secret offshore account? Why sell their flagship passion project to a direct competitor? It didn't add up. Mia watched as Marcus slid a pen and a single dense document across the table. Julian stared at it, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his loyalty warring with his instincts. The trust he had in his friend was a powerful, blinding force. Mia knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was watching a man about to be expertly slaughtered by the person he trusted most in the world. And she was the only one who saw the knife. The rest of the shift was a blur. Maya operated on autopilot, her mind a frantic storm of what-ifs. Her hands were steady as she poured coffee, but inside she was trembling. The image of Julian's conflicted face was seared into her memory. He hadn't signed the paper while in the diner. He'd told Marcus he needed to think to run it by his own legal team first. Marcus had masked his frustration with a tight smile, clapping Julian on the back and saying, "Of course, old friend. Due diligence. Just don't take too long. The offer is time-sensitive." The words echoed in Mia's head. Time-sensitive. It was a classic pressure tactic. All night she wrestled with herself. It was none of her business. She was a waitress. Interfering in the world of billionaires was like a mouse trying to stop a stampede. She could lose her job in a heartbeat. Sal, her manager, was a decent man, but he wouldn't risk the reputation of the Gramercy Pearl over the feeling of a part-time waitress. A complaint from a patron like Marcus Thorne could get her fired instantly. And without this job, her mother's care would be in jeopardy. The dream of Florence wouldn't just be delayed, it would be dead. But then she thought of Julian, his quiet kindness, the way he asked about her art studies and listened with genuine interest. He was a good person, surrounded by sharks he mistook for friends. The phrase, offshore holding account, kept snagging in her thoughts. It was a red flag, a giant waving banner of deceit, and it seemed only she could see it. Her father, a small-time accountant who died when she was a teenager, had drilled a simple mantra into her. Numbers don't lie, but the people who write them do. Always look for the accounts that are hard to find. By the time she locked up her apartment at 6 a.m. for her morning shift, she had made a decision. It was terrifying, reckless, and possibly the stupidest thing she would ever do. But her conscience wouldn't let her do anything else. Julian wasn't scheduled to come on that day, a Wednesday. She had to find another way. She remembered him once mentioning his office was in the Atlas building on Park Avenue. During her lunch break, fueled by nervous energy and a stale bagel, she took the subway downtown. The lobby of Innovate Dynamics was like stepping into the future. Gleaming white walls, holographic displays, and a silent, intimidating security desk. Mia in her worn waitress uniform that she hadn't had time to change out of felt like a ghost from another era. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked her, tone dripping with polite disbelief. I need to see Mr. Julian Croft. It's an urgent personal matter." Mia said, her voice barely a whisper. The receptionist, a chic woman named Chloe, scanned Mia up and down. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's extremely important." "Mr. Croft's schedule is booked for the next 3 weeks. I can pass on a message." "No, please." Mia begged, her desperation rising. "I have to tell him something in person. It's about Mr. Thorne." The mention of Marcus's name seemed to flick a switch. Chloe's expression hardened slightly. "I'm sorry I can't help you." Mia was about to give up when the glass elevator door slid open and Julian Croft himself walked out, deep in conversation on his phone. He looked stressed more so than yesterday. He didn't even see her. This was her only chance. "Mr. Croft," she called out, her voice louder than she intended. He stopped, startled, and his eyes widened in surprise when he saw her. "Mia, what are you doing here?" She rushed forward, ignoring the receptionist's sharp. "Ma'am, you can't." "I'm so sorry to bother you here, Mr. Croft. I know this is inappropriate, but I had to warn you," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I overheard you and Mr. Thorne yesterday. The Helios project. The sale to Sterling Global." Julian's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a guarded, almost cold expression. "My conversations are private." "I know, and I'm sorry I wasn't trying to listen, but what he was saying, it's wrong. An offshore holding account, selling your best tech to a competitor. It's not a good deal. It's a betrayal. He's using your trust in him to rob you blind." The air in the lobby grew frigid. Julian's jaw tightened. He ended his phone call abruptly. "Mia," he said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "Marcus Thorne has been my best friend since we were 15. He was the best man at my wedding. He's the godfather to my niece. He has stood by me through every failure and every success. You, on the other hand, are the woman who serves me coffee twice a week." Each word was a precise, painful jab. Maya felt her face flush with shame and humiliation. "I know how it sounds," she pleaded, "but my gut, my instincts, everything in me is screaming that he is deceiving you. Please just get an independent auditor, someone he doesn't know, to look at the paperwork. That's all I ask." He took a step closer. His eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment. "What you're asking is for me to betray a lifetime of friendship based on the gut instinct of a stranger who eavesdropped on my private lunch." Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" He looked past her to the mortified receptionist. "Chloe, please see that Mia is escorted out, and make sure she gets cab fare back to her restaurant." He turned and walked away without another glance, leaving Mia standing alone in the center of the vast, silent lobby. The finality in his voice was absolute. She hadn't just failed. She had been dismissed as a foolish, hysterical girl. She had offered a warning, and in return had been handed charity cab fare. As the security guard gently guided her towards the exit, she felt a crushing wave of defeat. She had risked everything and only succeeded in making a fool of herself and insulting the one wealthy person she thought was decent. Her warning had fallen on deaf ears. The taxi ride back to Queens was the longest journey of Mia's life. The city's vibrant chaos blurred into a meaningless smear of color and noise. Julian's words echoed in her mind. "The woman who serves me coffee." He had reduced her to her role, stripping away her identity, her intelligence, her concern, and leaving only the apron. The humiliation was a physical ache in her chest. She had been so naive. What did she expect? That he would thank her, launch an investigation, based on the frantic warning of a waitress she had crossed an invisible, unassailable line between their worlds. He lived in the stratosphere of loyalty and billion-dollar deals. She lived on the ground, worrying about the price of milk. When she got back to the Gramercy Pearl, Sal was waiting for her by the kitchen doors, his arms crossed his face, grim. "Russo. My office. Now." The walk felt like a march to the gallows. Sal's office was a tiny cluttered room that smelled of stale cigar smoke and bleach. "I just got off the phone with Chloe at Innovate Dynamics." He started not bothering to sit down. "She was discreet, but I got the picture. You went to Julian Croft's office and caused a scene." Mia stared at her worn-out sneakers. "I had to, Sal. I heard something. I don't care what you heard." He cut her off, his voice sharp. "My job is to run a restaurant, not a den of spies. My clients, especially clients like Mr. Croft, come here for privacy. They come here because they trust us. You broke that trust." "He was being cheated," she protested, her voice cracking. His best friend is Marcus Thorne." Sal said, his tone heavy with implication. "A man whose family probably owns the bank that owns the loan on this building. You want me to pick a fight with him, with them?" He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Mia, you're a good kid, a hard worker. But you were way out of your league. I can't have you working service if our patrons think you're listening in on their business deals." Mia's heart sank. "Are you firing me?" Sal was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her, and for a second she saw a flicker of sympathy. He knew about her mother. He knew how much she needed this job. "No," he said finally. "I'm not firing you. You're too reliable. But I'm taking you off the floor for the rest of the week. You'll be on kitchen prep, peeling potatoes, washing lettuce, no customer contact. And if I get so much as one more phone call, one more whisper of trouble, you're gone. Are we clear?" "Yes, Sal." She mumbled, the relief of not being fired immediately consumed by the shame of her demotion. "Crystal clear." The rest of the day was a monotonous, soul-crushing exercise in humility. She stood in the hot, steamy kitchen, her hands raw from peeling 100 pounds of potatoes, the rhythmic scrape of the peeler, a counterpoint to the frantic loop of her own failure replaying in her mind. The other kitchen staff shot her curious looks, but kept their distance. News travelled fast. She was the waitress who flew too close to the sun. That night she went home, her body aching, and her spirit shattered. Her mother was asleep in her bedroom, the soft sound of her breathing a fragile comfort. Maya sat in her art corner, staring at a half-finished restoration project, a small 19th-century oil painting of a seascape she'd bought at a flea market. It was damaged, covered in a century of grime and a botched varnish job from a previous owner. Her job was to carefully, painstakingly remove the false layers to reveal the original truth beneath. The irony was crushing. She could see the truth in a painting, but in real life she was powerless to make anyone else see it. She fell asleep on her small couch, haunted by dreams of Julian's disappointed face and Marcus's predatory smile. She had done the right thing, she told herself, but it felt like the wrongest decision of her life. She had lost Julian's respect, compromised her job, and accomplished nothing. Marcus Thorne was probably at that very moment clinking a champagne glass with Julian, celebrating the deal that would ruin him. The world, it seemed, wasn't a place where a waitress could save a millionaire. It was a place where she got put in the kitchen to peel potatoes. The next morning, she woke to the jarring sound of a car horn. Not the usual New York cacophony of 1,000 taxis, but a single deep, powerful blast right outside her building. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in her working-class Queens neighborhood. Annoyed, she dragged herself to the window and looked down at the street below, and her breath caught in her throat. Parked directly in front of her modest 3-story apartment building was a car. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. A long, impossibly sleek, gleaming black Mercedes-Maybach S-Class. It was so out of place, it looked like a spaceship had landed. A man in a crisp black suit and chauffeur's cap stood beside the open rear door, staring directly up at her window, as if he knew she was watching. Her first thought was that it was for someone else. A mistake. But there was no one else on the quiet street. The chauffeur's gaze was fixed, unwavering. Her heart began to pound a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't a thank you. This wasn't a coincidence. Julian had dismissed her. Marcus had every reason to want her silenced. A car like that, showing up at her door unannounced, felt less like a gift and more like a summons. Or a threat. Mia stood frozen at her window, her mind racing through a Rolodex of terrifying possibilities. Had Marcus Thorne sent this car, was it a message? An intimidation tactic to ensure her silence? Or was it worse, the kind of car that appears in movies right before someone disappears? Her neighborhood was quiet. No one would notice one girl being whisked away in a vehicle that screamed power and anonymity. Her mother's voice called from the other room, frail but clear. "Mia cara, what was that noise?" "Nothing, Mama," Mia called back, her voice tight with anxiety. "Just a car. Go back to sleep." She needed to think. Her first instinct was to hide, to lock the door, pull the blinds, and pretend she wasn't home. But the chauffeur hadn't moved. He stood like a statue, his presence a silent, undeniable demand. Running would only confirm she had something to hide. It might even make things worse. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she decided on a different course of action. She scribbled a quick note and left it on the kitchen counter for her mother. Mama got called into work for a special catering event. A car service picked me up. "I will call you as soon as I can. Love you." It was a weak lie, but it might prevent her mother from panicking if she was gone for a few hours. Then she did something her father would have called smart. She opened the voice memo app on her phone, hit record, and slipped the phone into her jeans pocket, making sure the microphone wasn't muffled. If this was a threat, she would have a record of it. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked down the 2 flights of stairs. Each creak of the old wooden steps sounded like a drumbeat of doom. She pushed open the heavy front door of the building and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The chauffeur, a man with a stone-carved face and impassive grey eyes, finally moved. He gave a slight, formal nod. "Amelia Russo." His voice was low and gravelly, devoid of any emotion. "Who's asking?" Mia replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I was sent by Mr. Croft," the man said. "He requests your presence." Mr. Croft. The name sent a jolt through her, a confusing mix of relief and renewed dread. Why would Julian send a car for her after dismissing her so coldly? Was this an apology? A trap? Had he told Marcus about her warning? And was this some kind of joint power play? "Where is he taking me?" she asked, standing her ground on the pavement. "I am instructed to take you to him. That is all the information I have been given," the chauffeur replied, his expression unchanging. This was a test of trust, a terrifying high-stakes leap of faith. She looked at the opulent, cavernous interior of the Maybach. It was a world away from her own. It could take her to a penthouse for an apology, or to a deserted warehouse for a lecture on minding her own business. But the fact that it was Julian, not Marcus, who had sent the car gave her a sliver of hope. Julian, for all his dismissiveness, had a core of decency. Marcus, she suspected, did not. "All right," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll come." The chauffeur held the door for her as she slid onto the plush, cream-colored leather seat. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thump, sealing her inside a world of absolute silence. The noise of the city vanished, completely replaced by the faint hum of the engine and the scent of expensive leather and polished wood. The driver, whose name she learned was Arthur, got into his seat, and the car pulled away from the curb with an impossible smoothness. They drove in complete silence. Arthur didn't speak, and the partition between the driver and passenger compartments was raised, affording her total privacy. Mia's mind was in overdrive. She clutched her phone in her pocket, the recording app still running a tiny secret act of defiance. She watched the familiar gritty streets of Queens give way to the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan. They weren't heading towards her diner, nor were they heading towards the Innovate Dynamics building. They drove uptown towards the ultra-exclusive residences lining Central Park. The real estate here wasn't just expensive, it was legendary. The Maybach finally slowed and pulled into a private gated driveway of a limestone behemoth of a building, the Orion Residences. A doorman in a crisp uniform rushed forward, but Arthur simply gave him a nod, and the gates swung open. They descended into a private underground garage, pulling into a reserved spot next to a silver Aston Martin. The ride was over, but the mystery was just beginning. "This way, Ms. Russo," Arthur said, opening her door. He led her not through a public lobby, but to a private elevator. He used a key card, and the elevator began its ascent, the numbers climbing rapidly. 30, 40, 50. It finally stopped at PH, Penthouse. The doors opened directly into a living space so vast and stunning that it literally took Mia's breath away. The room was a duplex with a 30-foot-high wall of glass, offering a jaw-dropping panoramic view of Central Park and the entire city skyline. The furnishings were minimalist and elegant, a massive white sofa, sleek chrome and glass tables, and walls adorned with what looked like original Rothko and de Kooning paintings. And standing in the middle of it, all silhouetted against the breathtaking view, was Julian Croft. He was alone. He turned to face her, and the expression on his face was one she couldn't read. It wasn't angry or disappointed. It was something else entirely, something heavy, somber, and deeply weary. "Mia," he said, his voice quiet, but echoing in the cavernous space. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. We have a lot to talk about." Mia didn't sit. She stood just inside the elevator entrance, her hand hovering over her pocket, the phone still recording. The opulence of the penthouse was disorienting, designed to awe and intimidate. But it was the look in Julian's eyes that truly unsettled her. The easy warmth she was used to seeing in the diner was gone, replaced by the haunted look of a man who had stared into an abyss. "Mr. Croft." she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Why am I here?" He gestured to the sprawling white sofa. "Please, Mia, and call me Julian. After yesterday, I think we're past formalities." She cautiously moved towards the sofa, but remained standing, crossing her arms as a defensive barrier. Julian didn't press the issue. He walked over to a floor-to-ceiling window and stared down at the park, a miniature green paradise so far below. "Yesterday," he began, his voice low, "I was arrogant, I was dismissive, and I was wrong. I owe you an apology." Mia was stunned into silence. Of all the scenarios she had imagined, a direct apology was not one of them. "When you left my office," he continued, turning back to face her, "I was furious. Not just at you, but at the accusation itself. The idea that Marcus, that he could betray me, it was unthinkable. It felt like you were telling me the law of gravity had suddenly stopped working. It was an assault on the very foundation of my life." He sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "So I did what any loyal friend would do. I called Marcus. I was going to tell him about the crazy accusation from my waitress, and we were going to have a laugh about it. But when I got him on the phone, something was off." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I asked him a few simple questions about the Sterling Global deal, about the timeline, about the holding account you mentioned, and he became defensive. He started using jargon, throwing around complex legal terms, trying to confuse me. It was a tactic he'd used on rivals, on hostile board members. He'd never used it on me before. He told me I was stressed, that I should leave the details to him, that he was protecting me." Julian walked over to a sleek, marble-topped bar and poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly. "That phrase, 'I'm protecting you,' is what did it," he said, his voice filled with a bitter irony. "That's what he's always said. But this time, it sounded different. It sounded like what someone says when they're hiding something. Your warning, as much as I hated it, had planted a seed of doubt. And Marcus's defensiveness was the water that made it grow." He looked directly at Mia, his eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty. "So I lied to him. I told him he was right, that I was just tired, and I'd sign the papers first thing in the morning. And then I did what you suggested. I made a call to a forensic accountant I know in Geneva, an old family friend, someone completely off Marcus's radar. I sent her the preliminary agreement and gave her access to the internal servers for the Helios project." He took a long drink of water. "She worked all through the night. The first email from her arrived at 3 a.m. The subject line just said, 'Call me now.' Julian put the glass down and picked up a tablet from the coffee table. He swiped the screen and turned it to face Mia. On the screen was a complex web of flowcharts, bank transfers, and shell corporations. It was a dizzying diagram of deceit. Marcus wasn't just selling the Helios patents to a competitor for a quick profit. Julian explained, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. That was just the surface. He had structured the deal through a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama. Sterling Global would pay a fraction of the patent's true worth to the first shell company. That company would then sell it to another and another, inflating the price each time, before finally selling it to Sterling Global's public-facing subsidiary for a massively overinflated market price. Mia stared at the screen, trying to comprehend the scale of the fraud. "Why, what's the point of all that?" "The point," Julian said, his voice hardening, "is that the profits from each of those intermediate sales were being funneled into that offshore holding account you overheard him mention, an account where the sole beneficiary was listed as M. Thorne. He wasn't just selling our company's future, he was planning to pocket about 90% of the proceeds. The pittance that Innovate Dynamics would receive would barely cover the project's losses, making it look like I had greenlit a failed initiative. Meanwhile, he would have walked away with nearly $500 million. The audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. Mia finally sank onto the edge of the sofa, her legs suddenly weak. But that wasn't the worst of it. Julian continued, swiping to another screen. This one showed internal company emails and stock purchasing orders. He was shorting my company's stock. He was using the money he was embezzling to place massive bets that Innovate Dynamics' share price would plummet after the news of the failed Helios project broke. He wasn't just robbing me. He was planning to burn my entire empire to the ground and dance on the ashes. It was a betrayal of unimaginable proportions. Not just business, but a deep personal and malicious destruction. The forensic accountant found everything, Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. Emails, encrypted messages, hidden ledgers. Marcus had been planning this for over a year. Every lunch we had, every time he clapped me on the shoulder and called me, "Brother," he was sharpening more the knife. He finally looked at Mia, and the weariness in his eyes was mingled with a profound, almost overwhelming gratitude. You were right. Your gut, your instincts. They saw what a lifetime of friendship had made me blind to. You stood in my lobby in your work uniform, and you told me the truth, even when I was too proud and too foolish to hear it. You risked your job, your livelihood for a man who treated you like you were invisible. He slumped into an armchair opposite her. The powerful tech mogul was gone, replaced by a man who looked utterly broken. I fired Marcus this morning, or I tried to. I presented him with the evidence. He didn't even deny it. He just smiled. He told me I was a naive fool who never deserved the success I had. He said he was the one with the vision, the one who deserved the empire. A heavy silence filled the magnificent room, a silence heavy with the ghosts of a dead friendship and a narrowly averted catastrophe. Mia finally understood. The car, the penthouse, the apology. It was all part of Julian's attempt to process the wreckage of his life. And she was at the very center of it. "You didn't just save my company, Mia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." In the quiet that followed Julian's revelation, Mia finally reached into her pocket and stopped the voice recording. The gesture was small, but the meaning was immense. The need for self-preservation had been replaced by a startling, unexpected sense of empathy. She was no longer a potential victim. She was a witness to a man's profound personal tragedy. "I'm so sorry, Julian," she said softly, and she meant it. The loss he had suffered went far beyond money. He managed a weak, grateful smile. "Don't be. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who owes you everything." He stood up, pacing the room with a renewed, though somber energy. "Which brings us to the reason I brought you here. An apology isn't enough. Words are cheap. What Marcus did was a crime, and my lawyers will handle that. What you did was an act of incredible integrity, and that deserves a proper reward." Mia immediately shook her head. "No, you don't owe me anything. I just did what I thought was right." "And that's precisely why you must be rewarded," he insisted. "People who do the right thing, especially when it's the hard thing, should see that it matters. I want to offer you a job, here at Innovate Dynamics, head of my personal philanthropic foundation, a 6-figure salary, full benefits. You'd be overseeing projects like Helios, ensuring the money goes where it's supposed to. Your instincts for spotting fraud are, shall we say, proven." It was a staggering offer, a life-changing, dreamlike opportunity that would solve all her problems in an instant. She could pay for her mother's care, move them into a better apartment, live without the constant, crushing weight of debt. It was everything she should have wanted. But as she looked around the impossibly luxurious penthouse at the cold, perfect art on the walls, she realized it wasn't her dream. It was a beautiful gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Her dream smelled of old canvas and linseed oil, not glass and steel. "Julian," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength she didn't know she possessed. "That is an incredibly generous offer. More generous than I could ever imagine. But my passion isn't in boardrooms. It's in a studio." Julian stopped pacing and looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You once told me," she continued, "that you were asking about my art studies, about restoration. That is my dream. To go to Florence to study at the Istituto per l'Arte e il Restauro, to learn how to bring history back to life. That's who I am." For a moment, Julian was silent. He seemed to be truly seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress or a savior, but as a person with a soul and a purpose all her own. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first she had seen that day. "Of course," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I was trying to solve your problems with my world. I should be helping you build yours." He walked over to a section of the wall that looked like a plain panelled surface. He pressed a spot, and a section slid back, silently revealing a climate-controlled art storage room. Inside were dozens of paintings, carefully racked and lit. "My family has collected art for generations," he said, beckoning her inside. Much of it was purchased with more money than expertise. Marcus, with his old-world sensibilities, often acted as my art advisor. He gestured to a painting at the end of the rack covered by a cloth. "He discovered this piece for me a few years ago. A supposed lost work from the studio of Artemisia Gentileschi." He carefully removed the cloth. The painting was a dramatic biblical scene, dark and moody, but something was off. The colors were too garish in some places. The craquelure of the paint looked unnatural, and there was a strange, dull sheen to the surface. It was what her professors would call a problem picture. "It's a fake, isn't it?" Mia said, her voice a hushed whisper. She didn't even need to touch it. Her restorer's eye saw the inconsistencies immediately. "My lawyers, in their sweep of Marcus's finances, discovered he'd commissioned it from a notorious forger in Brussels." Julian confirmed, his voice laced with disgust. "He sold it to me for $3 million. The forger was paid $50,000. He then pointed to a different painting, this one smaller and more modest, depicting a simple Italian landscape. It was beautiful, but it was obscured by a thick, yellowed varnish that flattened its colors and hid its details. "This one, however, is real," Julian said. "It's an early Corot. It's been in my family for a century. It's been begging for a proper restoration, but I never knew who to trust with it. Until now." He turned to face her, his expression serious and sincere. "I am not going to offer you a job, Mia. I'm going to offer you a future. I will pay for your mother's complete medical care, the best doctors, the best treatments for as long as she needs it. I will purchase your apartment for you, so you never have to worry about rent again. And I will fund your entire education in Florence, including tuition housing and a living stipend for the full 3-year program." Mia felt tears welling in her eyes, her throat too tight to speak. "All I ask," he continued, his voice gentle, "is that, when you are ready, when you have the skills and the confidence of a master, you make this little Corot your first official commission. And you allow me to be the first patron of the incredible career you are going to have." It was a reward beyond money, beyond a job title. It was a gift of freedom, the freedom to pursue her passion without fear, to care for her family without sacrifice. It was the priceless gift of her own life handed back to her. Through her tears, Mia looked at the man she had tried to save and realized he had in turn saved her in a way she never thought possible. "Yes," she whispered the single word, filled with the weight of 1,000 dreams coming true. Yes. 1 year later, the scent of turpentine and linseed oil no longer filled a cramped corner of a queen's apartment. It now perfumed a sun-drenched studio in the Oltrarno district of Florence, the artisan quarter, where masters had honed their craft for centuries. From her window, Mia could see the tiled rooftops of the city, and in the distance, the magnificent dome of the Duomo. Life had transformed in ways that still felt dreamlike. Her mother Isabella was living comfortably and safely back in New York, her medical care managed by a team of top specialists, all funded by a trust Julian had established. The constant worry that had been Mia's shadow for years had lifted, replaced by a lightness and a focus she had never known. She was thriving at the Istituto. Her professors praised her delicate hand, her patient methodology, and her innate understanding of a painting's soul. She was no longer just a student. She was an artist, a conservator coming into her own. She and Julian had maintained a quiet, steady friendship. They didn't speak every day, but he would email her articles on new pigment analysis technologies, and she would send him photos of her progress on various student projects. Their communication was a bridge between two vastly different worlds, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared life-altering experience. Marcus Thorne, she knew from the news, had not fared as well. His assets were frozen, and he was facing a mountain of federal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and market manipulation. His betrayal had been so spectacular, so brazen, that it had become a cautionary tale on Wall Street. The wheels of justice were turning slowly but inexorably. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Mia was painstakingly removing a layer of discolored varnish from a 17th century still life, the director of the institute knocked on her studio door. "Signorina Russo," he said, his Italian accent warm. "You have a visitor." Mia looked up, confused, to see Julian Croft standing in the doorway. He was dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, in a simple linen shirt and trousers, but he still seemed to carry an aura of quiet intensity. "Julian," she gasped, wiping her hands on her apron. "What are you doing here?" "I had a business meeting in Milan," he said with a small smile. "I decided to take the train down. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Never," she said, her heart doing a little flutter that surprised her. "Welcome to my world." She gave him a tour of her small studio, explaining the complex chemistry of the solvents she was using, the delicate process of in-painting, the way light and time changed a canvas. He listened with the same focused attention he had once given her in the diner, but this time he wasn't just being polite. He was fascinated. He was seeing her truly, her in her element. "I brought you something," he said, handing her a slender, protected cardboard case. She opened it carefully. Inside was the small 19th century seascape she had been working on in her Queen's apartment, the flea market painting that had been her only escape on the night she thought she had ruined her life. "My housekeeper was packing up the last of your things from your old apartment to put in storage," he explained. "She found this. I figured it belonged here with you. A reminder of where you started." Mia traced the frame of the little painting, a wave of emotion washing over her. It looked so humble next to the grand Italian masterpieces she now worked on daily, but it was a powerful symbol, a symbol of hope in the dark. They walked out of the studio and into the golden light of the late afternoon, wandering through the ancient streets towards the Ponte Vecchio. "I have some final news about Marcus," Julian said quietly, as they leaned on the stone railing of the bridge, watching the Arno River flow below. The investigation uncovered something bigger. He wasn't just defrauding me. He was the center of a whole network laundering money for some very dangerous people. The Helios deal was just his attempt at a massive cash-out before it all collapsed. Your warning. It didn't just save my company. The FBI said it helped them unravel an international criminal enterprise. Mia stared at the water, stunned. The ripple effects of her single, terrified act of courage were vaster than she could have ever conceived. "You see, Mia," Julian said, turning to look at her, his eyes serious. "You didn't just warn a millionaire about his friend. You threw a stone in a pond, and the ripples changed the world for a lot of people." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, honey-colored glow over the city of the Renaissance, Maya felt a profound sense of peace. The life she was living was not a reward for a single act, but the rightful consequence of choosing integrity over silence. Julian stood beside her, not as a patron or a billionaire, but as a friend. The space between them was no longer an unbridgeable chasm between a waitress and a mogul. It was just the quiet, comfortable space between two people who had, in a strange and unexpected way, saved each other. The future was unwritten, as vast and beautiful as the Tuscan sky above them, filled with the promise of masterpieces waiting to be restored. The story of Amelia Russo isn't just about a car and a millionaire. It's a powerful reminder that integrity is a currency more valuable than any stock or bank account. It's about the incredible power that lies within a single person's choice to speak truth to power, no matter how small or insignificant they feel. Amelia's courage didn't just change her life and the life of one man. It sent ripples out into the world that dismantled a network of corruption. It proves that one voice, speaking with conviction, can be louder than 1,000 lies whispered in a boardroom. If this story inspired you, or restored a little bit of your faith in doing the right thing, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Amelia's position? We love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will move, inspire, and remind you of the extraordinary impact of ordinary courage. Thank you for watching.